It's high on a mountain, the warm winds are blowing, and where the winds are blowing to, there ain't no way of knowing. The mountain grass is short, it's dry and close to burning, crying out for water as the seasons turning.
Hello, my name is Ayana Young, and I welcome you to Unlearn and Rewild, where we explore radical ideas relating to Earth activism. Today we have Linda Tucker on of the Global White Lion Protection Trust. Linda Tucker grew up in South Africa during apartheid and attended the universities of Cape Town and Cambridge. In 2002, she founded the Global White Lion Protection Trust, a non-profit community conservation organization that works not only to protect the white lions, but also to conserve the knowledge of the Tsonga and Sepedi cultures, which celebrates the white lions as sacred living heritage. She has been a guest speaker on multiple international conservation congresses, and her work has been featured in documentaries produced by National Geographic and CBS. She lives in Sioux White Lion Heartland, a protected wilderness area neighboring the Simba Vaati Private Nature Reserve, with her partner, lion ecologist Jason Turner, and the white lion prides they have reintroduced to their ancestral land. Hello, Linda. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, you sound as if you're in the room here in the Bushville.
Goodness, well, I wish I was. Well, I'm so excited to speak to you. Inspired is a weak word, really, for how grateful I am for your work.
Ayana, it's a pleasure to speak to you from the heart of White Lion territories. I'm in our headquarters here, and all around me is the expanse of the African bushveld.
So, just to jump right into these deep, aching questions I have for you, one of the central themes of this show is mending the separation from nature and moving from fear and commodification of nature into a sort of reverence. Well, you have some unparalleled first-hand experience with the primal fear instinct. So can you tell us about your experience that you open your book with?
Yes, I can, and I'll come to that in a moment. Let me simply say that the way that you describe a rewilding, an unlearning, and a deep reverence for nature is the way that I would describe lion-hearted leadership. We do leadership training now in our project, and we describe lion-heartedness as that fearlessness inspired by love and reverence for nature, capable of changing the world. So I'm really delighted to be able to share my story on your radio station, because I know that it will reach people who really want to make a difference, and it will help empower them to do so. So the story that you're asking me to retell is often asked of me, and I have to say it has such a legendary quality that it's hard to believe it actually happened, but it did. So it's best told around a fire under the African stars. And it occurred one dark night in Africa when I was returning from my life. At that stage, I was actually an advertising executive in Europe, but I returned to South Africa to restore my heart, because I was in a very artificial world of advertising, marketing, and fashion. So I had returned to the African wilderness, and on this one dark night, it was the 10th of November, 1991, I found myself in the middle of a wild pride of lions, 24 lions, and there was a group of us in a very low, open-back vehicle surrounded by these angry lions at night, without any way of contacting the outside world. Our vehicle had broken down and people started panicking. And once people start behaving like prey, predators are predators, and lions are nocturnal predators. So there was growling, there was sinister snarls in the dark bushes. We had a spotlight attached to the battery of the vehicle. So each time we'd hear a rustle or a snarl, we'd spin the spotlight, and there we would see glinting predatory eyes. And you can imagine this is an archetypal nightmare, only it was actually happening to me. And we had no way out of that situation. It was getting worse and worse as people increasingly panicked, so the lions closed in. The fact is there was no way out of that situation. No one knew where we were. There was no cell phone coverage. We had no radio contact with the outside world, and we were literally surrounded by a very angry pride of wild lions. And the worst of it was that the spotlight was starting to fade. So I don't know what's worse, watching someone being pulled off a vehicle and eaten alive, or not being able to see and just listening to the grisly sounds. I mean, this was the living nightmare that we were in. What happened actually was a miracle. When I look back at it, I realized that it truly was divine intervention. What happened was that in the midst of this crisis, a woman came walking on foot through the darkness, carrying a baby strapped to her back. She was a traditional African medicine woman, an elderly woman, and she walked straight through the lions and calmed them and came to our rescue. She climbed into the vehicle without a word. She couldn't speak any English, and she simply sat in front of me holding power. When I look back at it, in fact, it was as if she was carrying a light through the darkness. And when she climbed into the vehicle, she handed this light over to the man in front of me who'd been as panicky as the rest of us. And he instantly became a hero. And instead of screaming and actually standing up shouting for help, which was pointless in the African wilderness, suddenly he became very focused and he said, "You stay exactly where you are. I'm going to go for help." He took the wheel spanner, and little help that would be with the pride of angry lions, but he took the wheel spanner and he retreated along the route that she had come to look for help. And he finally got help and returned with a rescue vehicle. But if I look back at that night, the real heroine was that woman who walked through the lions to save us. And the fact that she was carrying her baby on her back was her symbol to indicate that she had total faith in the outcome. She knew she would not be harmed, otherwise she wouldn't have brought her granddaughter into the jaws of death. And it was that single event that changed my life.
All right.
It is such an incredible story that it's really beyond even comprehension for so many of us who live so separate from nature and primal fear and predator-prey relation. It seems in modern society, the primal fear instinct is increasingly morphing into a kind of permanent paranoia that upholds the separation from nature. And since you have managed to overcome that fear and separation in such an extraordinary way, can you tell us a bit about this psychological shift you underwent, this personal rewilding, how you've turned fear into respect?
Very well put. That was the process for me. She had ignited courage in this man in front of me, but for me, she had, she'd lit a fuse that took much longer to burn and burn. And I returned to my artificial life in Europe, where I was in in this world of marketing and branding and advertising and messing with people's minds, getting them to buy products they didn't want. It was very empty existence. I felt as if I was sleepwalking. And yet this fuse was burning from that day when this dramatic incident had happened back in Africa. And one day this fuse exploded in my life, and I just realized I'd been living a lie. And I had to return to Africa and track down this woman because she represented the truth. And I did so. And when I found her, she was in a traditional village where she was the resident indigenous healer. And it was as if she'd been waiting for me all that time. 3 years had passed while I'd wrestled with the consequences of this event. And when I arrived through an interpreter, she said, it's taken you a long time to wake up. And it really was as if I needed this kind of dramatic wake-up call because I was sleepwalking. I was so disconnected from my heart and from nature, which is the source of all inspiration, that it needed something as dramatic as a near-death experience to shock me into reconnecting with my roots and everything that is important to me now. So my first question to her, of course, was, how did you do that? How did you walk through the wild pride of lions without getting eaten? And she laughed scornfully at me and she said, do you realize you were the aggressors? The lions were protecting a lioness that was giving birth to cubs in the riverbed nearby, and you were invading their sacred space. In that description, my consciousness turned a kind of 360-degree. It was revolutionary. What I suddenly realized that we were the aggressors and the lions were protecting what is sacred. In fact, what was taking place on that night is the birth of a sacred white lion cub, the last white lion that was born in these lands for a period of nearly 2 decades, because this rare species that is believed to be the most sacred animal on earth had been removed by artificial means and hunted to extinction. And we were totally ignorant of what was going on. We had simply invaded the lion's space because we knew there was a pregnant lioness and we thought we might be able to see something interesting. So that was the beginning of my teaching by Maria Corsa, who was known as the Lion Queen of Simba Vaati. I suddenly realized that I had a great deal to learn. And the next thing, she said there was no danger. She said she would never have taken a baby on her back if she was really at risk by the lions. In fact, she said, the lions are my family. They were created by God. And I know that if I have no intention of harming them, they would have no intention of harming me. And that was the second great lesson she taught me. In fact, she said, you never need to fear in nature if you have love and respect. Those are the 2 rules that you need, and nature will protect you and never harm you if you uphold those 2 rules.
Mm. You were educated in the institutional system of Oxford and Cambridge, and in that reality, there is a deep prejudice towards other realities, such as those of the Tsonga and Sepedi people you've lived with. So you were selected to apprentice in this tradition, learning to see the world in a completely different light, directly from these great medicine people of old Africa. In this new light, telepathy is essential to survival. Love and respect are laws of the universe. So I'm wondering, was it challenging to overcome your academic programming? Can you take us through your unlearning process?
Yes, well, I can truly say, if I were to summarize it in one sentence, I would say that the teachings of this incredible medicine woman, who was the most courageous woman I have ever met in my life, outshone anything I have ever learned in the great institutions of Europe. Her indigenous knowledge systems were so profoundly connected to the source of life and to the source of joy. and to the sharing across species that it made the training that I'd received in the ivory towers of Oxford and Cambridge seem really superficial in a way and very out of touch with the purpose of what we as a species are doing on this incredible planet of ours. In fact, we are part of the ecosystem. If we only remember that, we will find our joy again. And to learn from someone who regarded lions as her family and who could literally walk amongst them, I mean, what can be a greater teaching? She hailed from a long lineage of African astronomer priests, which dated back to Egypt and long before, who had this tradition of honoring lions by performing a ceremony of reverence. And whenever there was the harvest time, there would be sacred or traditional bear brood, and she would leave this for the lions in a ritual act. And then in exchange for that ritual, they would let her walk amongst them and they would let her carve meat off their kill. And so it was that the high priest of African knowledge and the royal lions, the king and queens of lions, would engage in this exchange of absolute profound reverence. It sounds impossible to imagine, and yet when I started investigating this practice, I discovered that this was a tradition that existed throughout the ages, and other explorers in Africa had actually documented these kind of rituals. So she was one of the last of the traditional practitioners of this amazing custom.
It was fascinating to read about the parallels in other indigenous cultures who have their version of the white lion. I actually took some notes on that. The Sioux Nation has the white buffalo. The Canadian First Nations have the spirit bear, the white black bear, as well as the white raven. Icelandic tradition involves a white whale. The Sami people of Scandinavia have the white reindeer, and the Inuit have the reverse situation, a black polar bear. You mentioned that you were trained in reading signs, and I'm wondering what your take is. Do you have a theory about why we see this phenomenon of white animals among indigenous people? Are they considered to be bringing us a message?
Yes, having considered this over a couple of decades, I truly believe that they are signs from nature. They're signs of divinity in nature across cultures, not limited to any one particular religious belief. This is a belief that unites all of us. And the reason that they've started appearing in our times has to do with big changes, climate changes, and the fact that if we don't take heed of these signs and return to that state of reverence, we might, in fact, have to experience the cataclysms that have also been not only prophesied, but warned by our scientists and climatologists and our scientific disciplines as well.
And your partner is a lion ecologist, and I'm sure you talk about this stuff all the time. But how is the ecosystem dependent on lions? What do you speculate would happen ecologically if lions were wiped out, or if all large predators were wiped out?
Well, this is what is so fascinating when you get to the truth of issues, is that you cross cultures and you cross disciplines. What is true in indigenous knowledge ultimately is true for science. So this is a very good example, the example you ask. In ecology, if the apex predator goes extinct, the entire ecosystem collapses because the apex predator regulates the prey base. The prey base regulates the food base, and the food base, the habitat, relies on the earth itself. So it is literally a pyramid of life, or a great chain of being. And if the apex predator, the lion, goes extinct, the entire system collapses. Well, it's the same ecologically, and it's the same spiritually in the cultural beliefs, because The lion represents stability. It represents the restoration of natural order and leadership in human systems. So if this great animal disappears from the plains of Africa, we have lost not only a leadership icon in our human world, we have lost the wilderness which supports all of creation. So everything is hanging in the balance, and we need to restore our connection with nature and the great lion heart within us that I believe so many of us have if we're only brave enough to re-access and to feel love again and to feel these connections with the wild that is truly part of our nature.
Wow, I'm really touched by the lion heart and the courage to find that strength, that bravery inside ourselves and go straight for it, go straight for what we believe in against what we may have learned as children or what society has taught us. To kind of get into the nitty-gritty, I was wondering if you could talk a moment about the genetics and what happens to the genetic pool of white lions when they are subjected to speed breeding and inbreeding, and how does your organization maintain the genetic stability in your prides?
Yes. Well, I think it's important to share with our listenership that although the white lions are regarded as the most sacred animal on the African continent, there are incredible myths and legends associated with them. They are believed by the Tsonga and the Sepedi people to be children of the sun god, to be star lions, to be cosmic animals that have returned to the earth to guard humanity at a time of great transition. So there are incredible stories around them that have this deep, deep, deep resonance of profound truth on the one hand. But on the other hand, what has happened in our modern day is industrialization of wild animals such that it has become the most brutal, mechanistic killing machine imaginable. I'd like to avoid going into the details because the reality is really hard to stomach. I mean, truly you need a lion heart to stomach what is taking place in wildlife today. In the case of the white lions, they have been forcibly removed from their sacred homelands, put into cages, zoos, and circuses, and in the worst cases in South Africa, bred in cages as tamed animals to be killed as trophies. It's despicable beyond imagining, and it's a commoditizing from the moment they're born as these adorable, truly adorable little fluffy lion lambs that are then farmed out for people to pay to cuddle. And those same baby cubs are then forced into cages and when they grow up are shot as trophies. Tamed lions. And this has happened over the last 2 decades since I've been campaigning for the protection of these sacred animals. So it's all sped up in the most unimaginably catastrophic way. Now, so you would imagine the context is almost beyond imagining, as I've said. 60% of lion trophies today are going out to the States. There are more lions in cages in South Africa than there are in the wild. The statistics are truly horrifying, and it's become a killing industry that is linked to the tourism industry. So the cub petting industry for tourists is the same industry that later shoots them as trophies. It's really, really important that the public recognizes this. It's a thinly disguised facade that most tourists buy into, that this is simply a petting park. It's the other side of the trophy hunting industry. So your question about what happens to the genetics of the white lions, well, in these captive breeding centers, there is terrible genetic impairments. It's not only damage to the individual lions who live in absolute total misery, it's damage to the genetics of the whole subspecies. So the focus of our project is the protection of the white lions in the heartlands of their endemic territories, which is one region only on Earth. It's actually at the epicenter of the Kruger-2 Canyons biosphere, which is a vast wilderness area that was declared a biosphere by the United Nations. And a biosphere, that the meaning of a biosphere is a wilderness area that includes human habitation. So we have the privilege of communities living in a vast ecosystem together with wildlife and the king of all animals, the lions, and the king of kings, the white lions. So our focus is on protecting the genetic pool of the white lions in the wild lands of their ancestry.
Yeah. The canned hunting, as you've talked about in your book, and the petting zoos, it is beyond imagination that this is going on. So obviously the canned hunting goes beyond South Africa. It's a global pandemic, but it is to some degree being exposed and denounced. Can you fill us in on the situation there about what does the resistance look like in South Africa? I've heard there was a major demonstration recently. Were you a part of that?
Yes, so it's very encouraging. What has changed in my campaigning as a conservationist over 2 decades is social media. And truly what this means is that the public is empowered to make a difference. You don't have to rely totally on ineffective policymakers or governments or parliaments to pass legislation. The public is an immensely powerful force. And when it is activated through true lion-hearted principles, it's unstoppable. So that's exactly what we have started to achieve. And what you're referring to is a global march for lions that our organization was largely involved in, together with lion conservation groups worldwide, and united with responsible members of the public in 62 cities around the world. That included New York, Washington, LA, places around the world, but the States was very active in supporting this. And it united on the same day with one united message to shut down this despicable industry. We united forces with a VARS organization, which collected nearly 2 million signatures at that time.
Wow.
And this is ongoing. And in our case, we called on the assistance of one of the most dearly beloved resistance fighters on earth, along with Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is one of the most beloved people who has not only highlighted human rights issues in apartheid South Africa in the past, he is now standing up for animal rights causes because, as he quite rightly points out, this is God's creation and it is not up to humanity to destroy it. So he came in support of this cause, and the white lions in particular, with the most incredibly moving prayer, which took place on the 15th of March this year and will take place again on that same date next year until we've finally solved this crisis.
So there's a discussion of a total ban on canned hunting and lion farming in South Africa. What is the status of that initiative, and what is needed to make that happen?
Right. Well, there are 2 things that are needed. The first is the industry, and the second is the demand. So it's the suppliers and the demand. So we could shut it down in South Africa, which is one way, but there are many, many, many people and corrupt officials benefiting from this industry. The other way is to shut down the demand, and that is probably the more effective route to go in the interim term. So there are, in fact, moves afoot by responsible congressmen in the States who are speaking with members of parliament in the UK, where I was privileged enough to present at Westminster last year, calling for a prohibition of lion trophies coming into USA ports and UK ports. That would solve the problem. So this is an excellent strategy. And in fact, it's been taken up by Australian congressmen who are going to be implementing it so that trophies will not be allowed into Australia. Unfortunately, Australia isn't a huge market for captive killing of lions, but the States is, unfortunately. So if we could get it passed by your congressman, that will help to shut down the industry.
Yeah. The debate about the lion farming is so deep because lion farmers argue that they take pressure off wild lion populations, which is ridiculous on so many levels. But there's evidence that poachers in neighboring countries are killing entire prides in the wild to steal cubs that they then sell to lion farms, since the farms constantly need fresh lions to diversify the gene pool. Recently, 4 white lion cubs were born to a German circus, and my initial reaction was, yay, more white lions in the world, but immediately followed by a more sober thought that they would never be set free, they'd be exploited and caged their whole lives. And there is a common belief that predators once domesticated would pose a threat to humans if set free, even though last time I checked they were the endangered ones. So is it true that these creatures are psychologically stunted, socially stunted, genetically unstable, and have no survival skills? But is there any way short of release into the wild to improve the lives of the domesticated lions?
These are big issues, Ayana, and critical issues that impact on the destiny of humanity. What happens to lions will impact on the future of the human species, truly. So I know it sounds far-fetched, but when you unpack it, you recognize that our destinies are linked, not only because the lion represents the leadership icon symbol for humanity across all cultures. You'll see all the royal crests of all nations, whether they're in the East, whether they're British, whether they're American, they all draw on the lion as a symbol of good governance. So when this animal is destroyed, it is destroying the core psychology at the very heart of our identity as a human species. And the crux of the issue, it's complex when you get into the human politics of it, but it's very simple when you identify the problem. And if we draw on Einstein to help us solve this problem, we'll recognize what the solution is. You'll remember Einstein reminded us that you cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created that problem, right? Now, the problem that we're facing, a dire crisis, is the problem of consumerism gone mad. The fact that consumers believe they can do anything if they put a price on it, however immoral, however unsustainable, however unjust it is. Well, you can't solve the consumerist problem with a consumerist solution. You can't say, let's protect trophy hunting in the wild by breeding lions in captivity to solve that problem. Or let's solve the rhino horn crisis in the wild by putting a whole lot of rhinos in captivity and carving off their horns, which is unfortunately what most conservationists are proposing today to solve the rhino crisis. You're simply perpetuating this madness of humans believing they have a right to be consumerist to the destruction of all creation. So you have to think outside the mindset. And that is what true lion-heartedness does. It reminds humanity that we have a heart that is connected to the meaning behind creation. And we have a responsibility to govern our earth in a way that is worthy of the divine. of the Creator, who entrusted this incredible, wonderful world to us of magical creatures, great and small. We have to return to that state of profound reverence that we know in our hearts of hearts is a kind of condition of being in the Garden of Eden. But we have to return there with the full knowledge of what happens when you are capable of destroying your earth. We will return to that state of reverence with a maturity, not an innocence that we originally had. And that is true conservation today. And that is that true condition that all of us are yearning for, and that all of us can reclaim when we reclaim our hearts.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Now, regarding lions bred in captivity, what is your opinion of the work of Kevin Richardson, who I think has a show on Animal Planet, who has created a sanctuary for lions bred in domestication?
Well, I do have a policy that I do not criticize other people in this industry, but I do think it's important for the public to recognize where they see authentic conservation and where they see showmanship.
Yes.
And from the perspective of a true healer, such as Maria Corsa, Lion Queen of Simba Vaati, I have to say that Kevin Richardson is an accident waiting to happen. And if we look at Siegfried and Roy, the great magic men of Las Vegas, that accident did happen. And that is an imperative. What happened to Roy, unfortunately, it's extremely unfortunate, but it is nature's way of reaching out to a mass audience and saying, this is unacceptable. We will not be treated as caged circus animals for human vanity, that there is a much deeper reason to all the creatures in nature that links us to our divine origins.
Welcome back. We are here on the line with Linda Tucker, halfway around the world, speaking to us directly from the native habitat of the great white lions of South Africa. And now I'd like to branch out and ask about the place that produced them, Simba Vaati. What is unique about it? Why is it so significant ecologically? And what hardships does the region face?
Well, it's part of the very deep legends surrounding these creatures. And I've written 2 books on this over the past decades. The first is called The Mystery of the White Lions, which goes very, very deep into the connection between these legendary animals and ancient Egypt. In fact, the exact location of the white lion's occurrence on Earth, the only place where they were born naturally, aligns exactly with the resting place of the Great Sphinx of Giza. In other words, the mystery of the white lions and the riddle of the Sphinx are directly linked, not only in the meaning behind their occurrence on Earth, but actually geographically. And this link is a ley line or a longitudinal line that was identified by the ancient Egyptians as being sacred. They called it the golden line of first time. It in fact appears to be a seam of pure gold that links the monuments of Giza in the north all the way down through the continent of Africa. And it is this seam or axis that in fact holds our Earth in balance in relation to the sun. I mean, these are profound cosmic issues that are uncovered in the legends behind the white lions. So as you see, they're no longer legends. They're actually profound windows into the workings of our cosmos and the hand of a divine creator. So, you know, we should all be in absolute awe of these majestic creatures. On your question of what is appropriate to handle wild animals in petting parks, I think the key to it is to ask yourself the question, is this about me or is this about the best interests of this animal? And if you truly ask that question, you will know the answer. And if you truly honor that, you will start serving nature instead of self-serving.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain the man-made barrier in that area that prevents the lions from reaching the river?
It's really fascinating because we've described this golden ley line, which is possibly the most powerful ley line on Earth. And yet, in modern day reality, a massive predator-proof fence has been erected all the way down this meridian line. It's called the red veterinary line. It's a man-made barrier that prevents the animals from the east in the Kruger National Park reaching the west, the source of all the rivers in the Drakensberg Mountains. So it's in effect carving a massive ecosystem in half, like putting the Berlin Wall across the Masai Mara. It requires that these fences come down for the whole ecosystem to integrate again. Now, our protected area for the white lions is in the heart of their ancestral territories. So it literally is on this golden ley line and it borders this predator-proof fence, which is called the red veterinary line. You see the brutal ignorance of modern humanity kind of superimposing itself on the profound wisdom of the ancients and the even deeper wisdom of the creative force within the continent of Africa.
And are you having habitat loss and water scarcity in your region?
Well, we have the risk of that in that this golden meridian I describe is actually exactly on the Nile. So it's the Nile meridian. And in the south, we have a parallel river, which is called the Tsao River, which is the Star Lion River. That is the only river that carries water throughout the year. Every other waterway in the region is a dry riverbed. So potentially there could be vast ecological consequences. However, the legend of the white lion is true in reality. The legend is that when the king returns to the kingdom, or of course when the lion queen returns to the kingdom, order will be restored on the planet. And so having created a protected area for these great kings and queens of the natural kingdom, we've seen a restoration taking place, and it's very heartening. You know, I'd like to maybe discuss the relevance of this for people living in cities, because it might seem very remote. but it has a profound relevance, because if we restore natural order in the natural ecosystems, we are helping to restore order in man-made systems.
And with your work in the Global White Lion Protection Trust, how are the lions doing, if we could have a little window into your world?
Oh, well, it's an absolute privilege and joy living with lions in the wild, and truly living with lions in the wild, where you don't attempt to tame them. You simply honor their natures, which are constantly an inspiration. Tragically, there are less than 10 white lions in the wilds of their natural system, while we had already mentioned there are hundreds in captivity in various states of a great trauma. But those in the wild are a vision to behold. They truly are the most royal of royal animals, and they have individual characters. They know they are kings. You know, if you do happen to encounter them, they will quite happily block the way, because they expect all other creatures to move around them. And when lions sleep, they sleep like kings and queens. They literally sleep on their backs with their paws in the air, you know, exposing the royal jewels for everyone to see, because no other creature sleeps with that kind of comfort, knowing that they are the apex animal. Every other creature either hides in a burrow or runs or climbs up a tree, but lions literally sleep in a pride, all cuddled up together. And that absolute sense of abandon, that this is life as it should be in the wild.
And how many lions are there right now?
In our project, there are 3 prides of lions in the wild. They are bonded with golden lions in this area, because from a genetic point of view, the secret code that produces the white lions is held in the golden lions of this region. And it was one of the triumphs of our organization from a scientific point of view when we collaborated with 7 other countries, including the States, the UK, Canada, Korea, South Africa, and Namibia, to discover the secret code that makes white lions unique. And that is called the genetic marker. That was announced by the BBC last year. And that will aid us in having the white lions declared a protected animal. We compared the genetics of white lions with snow leopards, tigers, the spirit bear of British Columbia that you mentioned, and other lions, of course, as well as little cats, domestic cats. And finally, we cracked this code, which was compared with finding a needle in a haystack. What that allows us to do now from a scientific, strategic point of view is to test all the lions in this great ecosystem to see the frequency of occurrence of this genetic code. And that will help us protect Panthera leo in general. So the white lions will help protect lions in general and protect the whole ecosystem in general.
What about for those of us who are here in the United States or globally that are not in South Africa? What can we do to help the Global White Lion Protection Trust and other forms of conservation in your region?
Well, there are many ways in which you can help. The first thing would be to go onto our website, whitelions.org, and you'll see various things you can do. Obviously, all donations are extremely welcome. It's a very expensive project to run. You know, we have constant anti-poaching issues. We have habitat management. We have vast electric fences to maintain, to ensure that the white lions are safe, because they can be hunted in the greater system. And we have a veterinary and scientific monitoring and all that goes with a campaign to protect a critically endangered animal. So when you make a donation, you can be specific about what you would like your donation to go towards. That includes a community upliftment program, an intensive program with the indigenous people of our region who revere the white lions. And we work with all levels of these communities, including the chiefs and the children, to protect this heritage together. So you might want your donation to go into conservation or community or education or veterinary. You can decide. So that's the one thing. The other thing is you can, if you like, experience the life-changing opportunity of coming out to our project. We're not open to the general public, in the best interests of the lions. So we don't have tour buses or anything of that kind. It's very low impact on these majestic animals in their sacred heritage lands. But we do have special groups coming out for very exciting experiences, which include training in animal communication techniques, which include artists groups coming out to paint the lions, and so on. If you look at our website, whitelions.org, you will see various options of how you can actually participate or come out as a voluntary intern to assist our project. Another way, of course, in which people can help is to buy my book and get to know more about these legendary animals. The first book I wrote is called Mystery of the White Lions, which was first published, in 2001, after 10 years of research with this incredible medicine woman, Maria Kossa, Lion Queen of Simba Vaati, who rescued me and then became my teacher. That's the first book. And that is published by Hay House. And the second book was published last year by Random House and North Atlantic in the States. And that book is called Saving the White Lions, and it tells my story. It was intended to be an inspiration to everyone because many readers indicate that it's given them the courage to do whatever it is they know they've got to do with their lives. It will have nothing to do with lions. It has to do with being lion-hearted in whatever way you have to be, whether it's standing up to your boss or whether it's leaving a marriage that is, caged to you, or whether it's, standing up for the truth in one way or another and helping nature, which is in such terrible crisis. So the book Saving the White Lions is relevant to everyone, whether you're in the heart of the city, as I was many years of my life. It's intended as an activation of our hearts and our souls so that we truly begin to live again in the way that we know we are destined to live a meaningful life. We're not here by random chance. Each of us can make a meaningful contribution.
And how would you suggest the people in cities who don't have the opportunity to be in nature, how can they connect with their calling?
Well, one way, all of us know this way, is to connect with our domestic animals, because the domestic animals are performing an incredibly important role of bridging the human world with nature. And, sometimes in some really seriously dissociated families, the animals are the only ones who really know how to show unconditional love. They teach unconditional love. So when you recognize this incredible love that you feel for your cat or your dog in the city, you'll recognize the love that pervades all of nature. And that is their gift to you, is to reconnect you with your heart in an unconditional way. Once you remember that, you really are starting to live again.
Thank you so much, Linda, for this extremely inspirational and lion-hearted conversation. I'm just feel so close to you and your work. And if there is anything you'd like to end on.
Well, Ayana, your interview was so clear that you understand the core issues behind my work. I was very grateful for this interview because I just feel we can talk at a level that I don't necessarily engage in. And so it would be wonderful, for instance, if we were to put a special group together from our listeners to make a journey out to the White Lion heartlands to meet with the king of all animals. I would be very happy to host such an expedition it would be without doubt the turning point of everyone's lives who makes that journey. So that's one way in which we might continue our conversation.
Oh my goodness, wow, I have chills. That is a dream.
Well, that is wonderful. And thank you so much for your interview. I really loved the questions and the intelligence behind them. So
thank you.
It does feel as if we've reached across continents. And that is, of course, what the lion heart does. It unifies people. So we've done that. And I thank you for this interview. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Linda. And
Ayana, if you just wait a moment, I think you will be able to hear lion roars in the wild in the distance. Let's see if we can hear.
oh my God.
They're literally echoing on all horizons as if they're aware that this is their moment to reach out across the continent.
Well, let them know that I am with them and love them.
As deeply soulful, telepathic creatures, I suspect that they're absolutely tuning in.
Now the dust lies thick and heavy where my feet are falling. There's nothing but the sound. The jaybirds calling. My mind grows dry and thirsty as the memories linger, drifting on the wind through the mountains like a river. Sweet smell of pine, tall western cedar.
Our first music clip was a field recording in the Shangan town where Maria Cosa lives. And then we heard a track called Kanetsa by Bella Fleck in collaboration with musicians in Madagascar. Thank y'all for listening to Unlearn and Rewild. And I'd also like to thank our producer, March Young.
Drifting on the wind through the mountains like a river. Sweet smell of pines, tall western cedar. Drifting on the wind through the mountains like a river.